The air hung thick with the metallic tang of burnt circuitry and something else, something cloyingly sweet and organic, like scorched meat. I pushed past the yellow tape, the plastic rustling against my coat, and stepped into what was left of Dr. Aris Thorne's high-security research lab. The uniformed officer at the entrance, a young man whose face was still a shade too pale, didn't bother with a greeting. He just nodded towards the devastation. "Looks like a hell of an accident," Reed, the lead detective stated, his voice a low rumble. He stood amidst the wreckage, hands on his hips, surveying the scene with an expression of weary finality. "Explosion, probably. Bioengineered something went sideways. Could be suicide, too, given the reclusive nature of the deceased." I didn't reply, my eyes already tracing the contours of destruction. The official narrative, already taking root, felt too neat, too quick. My gut, a finely tuned instrument honed over years of sifting through chaos, always bristled at easy answers. The lab, or what remained of it, occupied a significant section of the University Medical School cadaver storage facility. Thorne, I knew, had repurposed this space for his cutting-edge bioengineering work, a choice that had always struck me as peculiar, even for a mind as singular as his. Now, the once sterile environment was a testament to violent energy release. Steel benches were twisted into abstract sculptures, their surfaces blackened and pitted. Intricate machinery, once humming with precise purpose, lay in shattered fragments, wires splayed like nerve endings. The pervasive chill of the facility, typically maintained for preservation, had been overwhelmed by the heat of the blast, leaving a lingering, humid warmth that pressed against my skin. Beyond the immediate explosion zone, the facility's original purpose still asserted itself. Stainless steel gurneys, though empty, stood sentinel in the periphery, their pristine surfaces scarred by shrapnel. The faint, antiseptic smell of formaldehyde, usually dominant, was now a ghostly whisper beneath the acrid scent of the fire. My gaze settled on the epicenter. A crater, not deep but wide, marked the floor. The deceased, Dr. Thorne, lay slumped against a partially collapsed reinforced wall, his body a macabre still life of devastation. His lab coat, or what was left of it, was fused to his skin in places, the material scorched to a brittle crisp. His face, mercifully, was turned away, but the sheer force of the blast was evident in the way his limbs were twisted, defying natural articulation. The official assessment, that this was the result of a catastrophic miscalculation or a desperate, self-inflicted act, was certainly plausible given the visual evidence. A man working with volatile biological agents, pushing the boundaries of what was known, could easily fall victim to his own genius. But plausible wasn't proof. I knelt, ignoring the grit and debris that crunched under my knees. My eyes scoured the floor, the walls, the ceiling. The explosion had been powerful, no doubt. The blast pattern radiated outwards from the crater, charring and tearing. But as I meticulously followed the scorch marks, something caught my eye. They glimmered faintly, like trapped starlight, completely unlike the dull, carbonized debris that dominated the scene. I took a small, sterile brush from my kit, carefully sweeping away the surrounding dust. Beneath the soot, the concrete itself showed a distinct, almost surgical burn pattern directly beneath these shards. It wasn't the broad, diffused charring I'd expect from a thermal shockwave or a flash fire. This was precise, localized, as if a needle-thin beam of intense heat had etched itself into the material. And the shards themselves. They weren't glass, nor any metal I recognized from the lab's equipment. They had a crystalline structure, reflecting light with an unnatural brilliance. I leaned closer, my breath held. The lead detective was still conferring with the facility director, their voices a distant murmur. They saw a tragic end to a brilliant mind. I saw something else. This burn, this specific, almost delicate etching, didn't fit the narrative of a chaotic, uncontrolled explosion. An uncontrolled blast would have left widespread, irregular charring. This was too neat, too focused. And the crystalline residue. It wasn't a byproduct of the lab's known materials. It wasn't the kind of residue left by an accident. It felt deliberate. It felt placed. The deceased's groundbreaking research, they said, was potentially world-changing. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't suicide. This was a calculated act, masked by a symphony of destruction, and I had just found the first discordant note. The lab, or what remained of it, occupied a significant portion of my thoughts as the vehicle navigated the city streets. The shattered glass, the scorched metal, the acrid scent of ozone and burned chemicals clinging to the air, they painted a picture of a devastating accident, but my mind kept circling back to the faint, almost imperceptible detail I'd spotted, a discrepancy that whispered of something more. The building was a brutalist block of concrete and steel, tucked away from the main campus, its purpose evident in the lack of windows and the heavy, insulated doors. The air inside was perpetually frigid, a damp chill that seeped into the bones regardless of the season. A low, constant hum of refrigeration units provided the only soundtrack, a monotonous drone that seemed to swallow all other sounds. The sterile scent of antiseptic and something deeper, more organic, permeated the atmosphere, a smell that always tightened the muscles in my jaw. I found the medical examiner, a meticulous woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper intellect, already at work. Her back was to me, bent over the gurney, her gloved hands moving with practiced efficiency. The body of Aris Thorne, or what was left of it, lay beneath the harsh fluorescent lights. The medical examiner straightened, pushing a stray strand of hair from beneath him cap with the back of a gloved hand. "Reed. You're early. Or rather, I'm late." She gestured to the body. Initial assessment aligns with a catastrophic event. Multiple blunt force traumas, severe thermal burns, internal organ damage consistent with a high-pressure blast wave. The usual, for this kind of incident. The usual, I repeated, stepping closer, my gaze sweeping over the body, seeking what her trained eye might have missed, or dismissed as ancillary. But she peeled back a section of singed fabric from Thorne's arm. "But I'm seeing some curious burn patterns. These, for instance," she pointed with a blunt instrument to a series of concentric scorch marks on the skin, they're localized, almost surgical in their precision, distinct from the broader, more diffuse thermal damage caused by the general explosion. It's as if a focused energy source made contact before the main event, or perhaps concurrently, but from a very specific point of origin. My internal alarm bells, already ringing faintly, intensified. A focused energy source? Not consistent with a general lab accident? Not entirely. A chemical flashfire or a pressure vessel rupture would typically cause more uniform, widespread scorching. These suggest a direct, intense point of contact. Furthermore, she paused, adjusting her magnifying loupe, I'm also finding surprisingly little of the expected debris. Given the sheer devastation of the lab, I'd anticipate embedded fragments of glass, metal, even concrete dust. There's some, of course, but less than I'd expect from a victim at the epicenter. I leaned in, my eyes scanning Thorne's hands, his neck, areas often overlooked in the immediate aftermath of such chaos. What about anything foreign? Anything that doesn't belong? The medical examiner gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of her head. I've done a preliminary sweep. Nothing obvious. Microscopic analysis will take longer. She moved to Thorne's left hand, gently flexing the fingers. Though, I did notice something peculiar here. She pointed with the instrument again, this time to the cuticles of Thorne's left index finger. There, almost invisible to the naked eye, was a minute speck, barely larger than a grain of sand, embedded just beneath the skin. It wasn't black or gray like carbon residue, nor metallic. It had a faint, almost golden hue. What is that? I murmured, my heart rate quickening. This felt like the thread I'd been looking for. She carefully used fine tweezers to extract the speck, placing it on a sterile slide. Under the loupe, it shimmered. It's organic and highly unusual. My preliminary assessment suggests it's a specific type of pollen, reed. And not from anything native to this region, nor anything commonly found in a bioengineering lab. It's a very rare variant of Acanthus mollis pollen, typically associated with very specific, highly cultivated environments, often ornamental gardens or specialized botanical collections, usually indoors, where cross-contamination is tightly controlled. Acanthus mollis. Not a lab chemical, not a shard of glass, not even typical outdoor dust. A rare pollen, found embedded in Thorne's skin, seemingly untouched by the inferno that consumed his lab. My mind raced, connecting this seemingly innocuous detail to the localized burn patterns and the lack of expected debris. It didn't fit the picture of an accident. It screamed of something deliberate, something meticulously planned. Run a full-spectrum analysis on it, I instructed, my voice tight. And cross-reference it with any known botanical collections, private or public, in the region. The air there was thick with the smell of stale coffee and desperation. A junior investigator handed me a preliminary dossier. I flipped through the pages, scanning for names, for connections. The first name that jumped out was Silas Vance, a rival bioengineer. The dossier detailed a history of intense academic competition, several public disputes over research funding and intellectual property. A particularly nasty incident 6 months prior where Thorne had publicly dismissed Vance's groundbreaking theory as derivative and lacking empirical rigor. Vance had a reputation for being fiercely ambitious, perhaps even ruthless. His motive was clear, professional jealousy, and perhaps the removal of a formidable obstacle. Then there was Maya, a former research assistant. Her employment record was stellar until 6 weeks ago, when he was abruptly terminated from Thorne's team. The official reason cited performance issues, but a handwritten note from a colleague stated Maya had been growing increasingly vocal about Thorne's secretive work, claiming he was hoarding data and preventing her from publishing her contributions. She'd reportedly left the lab in a furious outburst, threatening to expose Thorne's unethical practices. Disgruntled, seeking revenge, perhaps even feeling entitled to Thorne's research, her motive was equally plausible. I leaned back in my chair, the rare pollen and the strange burn pattern swirling in my mind, now connected to the faces and motives of Vance and Maya. The official accident narrative felt like a flimsy veil, easily torn. This was no simple miscalculation. This was a carefully orchestrated act, and the killer had gone to extraordinary lengths to hide their tracks, but they hadn't been perfect. The pollen, the peculiar burns, they were threads, delicate but undeniable, leading me into a labyrinth of corporate secrets and academic rivalries. My gut had been right. This was murder. And I was just getting started. That _labs_secrets. I flipped through the pages, scanning the initial findings. The preliminary report echoed what I'd already surmised: Dr. Aris Thorne, a catastrophic lab accident, the possibility of suicide or miscalculation. But the microscopic trace, the unusual burn pattern, those weren't in here. My gut tightened. The junior investigator hovered, eager and a little overwhelmed. I handed the dossier back, the thin paper rustling softly. I need full access to Dr. Thorne's lab, I stated, my voice cutting through the low hum of conversation in the makeshift command post. Everything. His workstation, his server, his physical notes. The lead detective, a man with tired eyes and a perpetually rumpled suit jacket, looked up from a sputtering coffee machine. Forensics is still processing the scene, read. It's a biocontainment facility. We're working with their safety protocols. I understand the protocols, I countered, my gaze unwavering. But the longer we wait, the more compromised potential digital evidence becomes. And I want to speak to his assistant, Maya. Immediately. A few phone calls later, I was granted limited entry, escorted by a hazmat-suited technician and the lead detective. The air in the university building grew colder as we descended 2 levels, the concrete walls giving way to reinforced steel doors. The first chamber, a decontamination zone, hummed with air purifiers and UV lights. Beyond it, through thick, hermetically sealed glass, lay the main research area, a vast, high-ceilinged space filled with gleaming stainless steel surfaces, arrays of blinking monitors, and sophisticated genetic sequencers that looked like something pulled from a classified military project. The damage was contained to one section, a scorched crater on the floor where a specialized bioreactor had once stood. My eyes traced the burn patterns, not just on the floor, but up the wall, and the curious, almost surgical precision of the structural compromise. It wasn't the chaotic explosion one might expect from a simple malfunction. Maya's in the observation room, the detective said, gesturing towards a smaller, glassed-in office adjacent to the main lab. She's been quiet. I found her hunched over a mug, her shoulders drawn tight, as if bracing against an unseen blow. He was a young woman, probably in her late 20s, with intelligent eyes that now seemed hollowed by shock or something else entirely. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the ceramic. Maya, I began, my voice calm, I'm Reed. I'm investigating Dr. Thorne's death. I understand this is incredibly difficult, but your cooperation is crucial. She lifted her gaze, her eyes darting around the room, then back to me, wary. He was so careful. Can you tell me about his recent work? I pressed gently. His research into advanced genetic sequencing? Any specific projects that were nearing completion? She hesitated, her gaze drifting towards the scorched lab beyond the glass. He was close to something monumental. Something that could change everything. Global health, he said. But he also talked about its other applications. The kind that could be weaponized. Her voice dropped even lower. He became so paranoid in the last few weeks. He thought someone was watching him. He kept encrypting files, backing them up to obscure servers, then deleting the originals. Did he ever mention who he suspected? I asked, leaning forward slightly. She shook her head, a shiver running through her. No. Just. They. He said they were closing in. My mind raced. Paranoia, weaponized research, they. This wasn't just a lab accident. This was a conspiracy building itself brick by careful brick. Leaving Maya to her solitude, I moved to Thorne's workstation. The computer was locked, but with the help of a digital forensics specialist, we gained access. The desktop was meticulously organized, a stark contrast to the chaos of his demise. I navigated through folders, looking for anything out of place. It took the specialist nearly an hour, but then he let out a low whistle. Someone attempted a sophisticated wipe of specific project directories. Not just a simple delete, but a multipass overwrite designed to render data unrecoverable. And it happened. Less than an hour before the incident. My eyes narrowed at the timestamp. Attempted? Yes. They were good, but not perfect. They missed a few fragments, and the system's own journaling caught a ghost of the activity. He highlighted a string of code. More importantly, the access logs show an unusual remote login attempt from an unregistered IP address, just prior to the wipe. This wasn't a suicide, and it wasn't a simple accident. Someone had tried to erase Thorne's work, and when that failed, they'd resorted to something far more violent, but who? And what exactly was Thorne working on that warranted such extreme measures? The fragments of data, the ghost in the machine, suddenly felt like the most dangerous puzzle pieces I'd ever encountered. The fragments. They were more than just debris, they were a whisper from the void, a clue deliberately left behind or carelessly overlooked. I bagged them meticulously, each microscopic shard a potential key. The lab Thorne used for his groundbreaking research was state-of-the-art, but for this kind of analysis, I needed something more specialized. I needed to see beyond the visible spectrum. I drove the samples to a facility known for its electron microscopy and spectral analysis capabilities, a quiet, unassuming building tucked away on the edge of the city. A colleague, a woman with a perpetually tired but sharp gaze, met me at the intake. She knew my work, knew when I brought something in, it wasn't for a routine check. Rush order, I told her, handing over the sealed containers. Trace elements, high heat exposure. Anything unusual, he nodded, already moving towards the clean room. Give me a few hours, read. My mind replayed the scene at Thorne's lab, the precise placement of the incendiary device, the selective destruction, the attempted destruction of the data drive. Someone had wanted Thorne's work gone, and when that failed, Thorne himself. The trace element, whatever it was the killer's signature, an unintended consequence of their meticulous planning. When my colleague finally emerged, her expression was a mix of fascination and puzzlement. He held a tablet, its screen displaying intricate graphs and vivid false color images. You were right, Reed. It's unusual. Very unusual. She gestured for me to follow her back into a viewing room, dim and cool. On a large monitor, the spectral analysis results glowed. The primary composition is standard, but there's a unique signature here. She pointed to a sharp, isolated peak on a graph. A synthetic polymer. but not just any polymer. The molecular structure indicates extreme thermal stability and incredible tensile strength. It's designed for high-end industrial applications, things that need to withstand incredible stress and heat. My gaze narrowed on the glowing peaks. A synthetic polymer. Not a common lab chemical, not something you'd find in a typical bioengineering facility. This wasn't a byproduct of Thorne's research, but something introduced. Industrial applications? I repeated, the words feeling heavy. Like what? Aerospace, deep-sea exploration, advanced robotics, she listed. Things that demand materials at the absolute cutting edge. It's rare, custom-made, probably proprietary. Only a handful of companies even produce materials like this, let alone use them. A cold certainty settled over me. This shifted everything. The initial suspects, academic rivals, disgruntled former associates, suddenly seemed too small, too petty. This wasn't about a personal vendetta, this was about something far larger, far more valuable. Corporate. I spent the next few hours poring over Thorne's funding records, cross-referencing his research grants and collaborations. The name that kept surfacing, bold and insistent, was Omnicorp. A global conglomerate, known for its aggressive R&D, its tentacles reaching into everything from advanced materials to biopharmaceuticals. Their reputation for acquiring groundbreaking technologies, sometimes through less than ethical means, was well documented. Thorne had received substantial grants from Omnicorp for his early-stage research. The funding had tapered off as his work became more secretive, more isolated, but the connection was undeniably there. It was a thread, thin but strong, leading directly to a corporate giant. I arranged a meeting with Omnicorp's liaison, a man named Henderson, for later that afternoon. The company's headquarters was a glass and steel monolith, imposing and sterile. Henderson met me in a sleek conference room overlooking the city. He was impeccably dressed, his smile practiced and a little too wide. "Investigator Reed," he began, extending a hand that felt oddly soft. "We were so saddened to hear about Dr. Thorne. A true visionary. Omnicorp valued his contributions immensely." His tone was effusive, almost cloying. He offered me coffee, water, anything I might need. He was too cooperative. My internal alarm bells began to chime. "Thank you, Mr. Henderson," I said, my voice even. "I'm here to discuss Omnicorp's relationship with Dr. Thorne, specifically regarding his recent projects." Of course, he waved a dismissive hand. "We provided some seed funding, early-stage grants. Dr. Thorne was brilliant, as I said. But his work became increasingly specialized. We maintain an arm's-length relationship with many researchers, simply providing the capital for innovation." "And the nature of that innovation?" I pressed. "Specifically, was Omnicorp involved in any projects that utilized rare synthetic polymers with high thermal stability?" Henderson's smile faltered, a micro-expression of surprise flickering across his face before being quickly masked. "Polymers? Oh, well, Omnicorp is a leader in advanced materials, certainly. We have numerous divisions, but Dr. Thorne's work was primarily biological, as I understand it. Genetic sequencing, cellular regeneration, that sort of thing. Not really in the purview of our materials science division." He paused, then continued, his voice regaining its smooth cadence. Unless, of course, he was developing some sort of biocompatible polymer for internal applications? But that would be highly proprietary, investigator. I wouldn't be privy to such details. Did Dr. Thorne ever express concerns about the security of his research or any external pressures? I asked, watching him closely. Not to me, no, he said, shaking his head. He was a private man. Dedicated. Perhaps a little. Obsessive, but brilliant. Truly brilliant. He leaned forward, his voice dropping slightly. It's a tragedy, isn't it? Such a loss. We've already begun the process of reviewing our investment portfolio in similar research. Can't be too careful. His eagerness to close the conversation, to pivot to corporate damage control, was palpable. He offered access to their records, to anyone I wanted to speak to, but his answers remained vague, always skirting the edges of my questions. He was a master of evasion, cloaked in a veneer of helpfulness. He gave me everything I asked for, except the truth. Leaving the gleaming Omnicorp tower, the city lights blurred into streaks. What was the link between Thorne's biological work and Omnicorp's high-end materials? I found myself driving towards the university, a place I hadn't visited in months. I wasn't there for a body, not directly. I was there for records, for any overlooked detail in Thorne's earlier, less secretive work. Thorne had done his initial research here, before securing his private lab. He would have used the university's resources, its archives. The archivist, a stoic woman who barely looked up from her microfiche, directed me to the old requisition logs. I sat at a cold metal table, the fluorescent lights humming overhead, flipping through decades of precise, handwritten entries. Thorne had been meticulous, but even the most careful leave traces. The web of connections was spreading, and I was determined to follow every strand, no matter how obscure, until I found its center. The polymer, a shimmering whisper of synthetic material, was still the focus of my world. I had spent hours re-examining the microscopic flecks, cross-referencing every known compound in the industrial and biomedical databases. Thorne hadn't just stumbled upon it, he'd likely been working with it, or on it, for a specific purpose. My search led me down an unexpected path. One of the polymer's stabilizing agents, a rare isotope, had a very limited supply chain, primarily distributed to institutions engaged in advanced biointegration research. A quick query, filtering for the specific isotope and the polymer's known properties, yielded only a handful of recipients in the region. Thorne's lab was technically part of the university, but this facility was a separate entity, a vast, cold concrete structure built decades ago to house anatomical donations for medical study. It was late afternoon when I drove across campus, the brick buildings giving way to more utilitarian structures. Inside, the silence was profound, broken only by the hum of ancient refrigeration units. The facility manager, a stoic man with graying temples and a perpetually weary expression, met me at the entrance. He wasn't surprised by my visit. My badge and the university's prior notification had smoothed the way. Professor Thorne occasionally used a secure bay here, the manager explained, his voice flat, echoing slightly in the cavernous space. For specialized tissue research. Not anatomical dissection, mind you. More. Integration studies. He had a specific permit. He led me through a maze of corridors, past heavy, insulated doors, each marked with an alphanumeric code. We stopped at a reinforced door bearing Thorne's access code. My heart quickened. This was it. Inside, the bay was small, meticulously organized, and empty of anything organic. Stainless steel tables gleamed under stark fluorescent lights. On one, a small, sealed container, no bigger than a shoebox, was labeled with Thorne's project ID. It was empty. My gaze fell on a custom-built centrifuge, its interior coated with a thin, almost invisible film. I scraped a minuscule sample onto a sterile slide. Under my portable microscope, the familiar shimmering flecks of the polymer winked back at me. This was one of the sources. Thorne had been actively processing something here, something that involved this unique polymer. As I exited the facility, the sun was already dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in bruised purples and oranges. My mind was racing, connecting the dots. The polymer wasn't just present at the scene, it was central to Thorne's work, and he was using this secure, out-of-the-way facility for a part of it. The implications were significant. I was halfway back to my own lab, navigating the increasingly congested city streets, when it happened. I was stopped at a junction, waiting for the light to change, my thoughts still consumed by the cadaver facility. A delivery van, its sides splattered with mud, roared past the red light from the cross street. It was going far too fast, and for a split second, I saw its trajectory directly intersect with my driver's side door. I instinctively slammed on the horn, my foot already on the accelerator, lurching forward just as the van's front bumper scraped my rear fender. The sound was a sickening crunch of metal and plastic. The van didn't stop. It accelerated, disappearing into the evening traffic. My hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. It was too close, too deliberate for a simple mistake. No braking, no swerving. Just a straight, aggressive line aimed directly at me. A warning or an attempt. Back at my personal lab, the familiar scent of ozone and solvent usually greeted me, a comforting constant. Tonight, there was something subtly off. My lab was a sanctuary, a place of obsessive order. I ran my hand along the edge of my main workstation. A faint smear. Not dust, but a residual print, almost invisible, as if someone had wiped it clean but missed a microscopic trace. My eyes scanned the room. Nothing was obviously disturbed. No broken locks, no forced entry. But my desk drawer, where I kept my preliminary notes on the polymer's unique isotopic signature, was ever so slightly ajar. I always closed it with a firm click. Someone had been here. Someone meticulous. Someone who knew what to look for, and how to hide their tracks. My suspicions solidified into an icy certainty. I wasn't just investigating a murder, I was being targeted. The next morning, I found Maya waiting for me outside my lab, her face pale, her eyes wide with a fear that mirrored my own. "I heard about what happened to your car. It scared me." I nodded, urging her inside. I knew it wasn't just me being paranoid. She wrung her hands. Before Professor Thorne. Before it happened. I saw things. Strange things. I leaned forward, my full attention on her. "What kind of things, Maya?" Late at night, she began, her voice gaining a desperate urgency. "Sometimes I'd come in early, or stay late to finish up. I saw someone. Not Professor Thorne. Not anyone I recognized from the department. They'd use his private access. A tall figure, always cloaked, always moving fast. They were in the lab, sometimes for hours, when no one else was supposed to be there. I thought maybe the professor had hired a new assistant he hadn't told anyone about. But it was always at odd hours. Always in the dead of night. And they always left before dawn. A stranger, I clarified, my mind already piecing together the implications. Accessing Thorne's lab after hours, before his death. She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. I was too scared to say anything. I thought I was imagining things, or that it was just a secret project. But after what happened to him, and now to you, I just couldn't keep it to myself anymore. The puzzle pieces were starting to snap into place, forming a far more sinister picture than a simple lab accident. An unknown individual, accessing Thorne's high-security lab, using his credentials, before his death. And now, someone was actively trying to stop my investigation. This wasn't just corporate espionage or academic rivalry. This was something far more dangerous, and I was stepping directly into its path. The chill that had settled in my bones after the last encounter wasn't just from the autumn air. It was the cold certainty that someone wasn't just covering tracks, they were actively trying to trip me up, to stop me from unearthing the truth. This wasn't a passive cover-up anymore, it was an escalating threat, and the stakes had just ratcheted up considerably. Thorne's death wasn't an isolated event, it was a node in a much larger, more dangerous network. I retreated to my temporary workspace, a cluttered corner in an off-site university facility, far from the corporate eyes that seemed to track my every move. The screens glowed, reflecting the grim determination etched on my face. The sheer volume of data I'd pulled from Thorne's lab systems was staggering. Environmental controls, access logs, equipment diagnostics, network traffic, even biometric scans from the entry points. Each byte was a potential witness, silent and unblinking. My initial focus landed on the lab's atmospheric control logs. Thorne's research involved highly sensitive atmospheric compositions, specific gas mixtures, precise pressure, and temperature gradients. Any deviation could compromise his experiments, or worse, trigger a catastrophic reaction. The official report cited a rapid, unforeseen pressure spike and a subsequent thermal runaway. My gut, however, had screamed orchestrated. I started with the hours leading up to the incident. The log files, initially appearing seamless, started to show microscopic tremors, almost imperceptible blips in the data stream. It was like watching a heartbeat monitor for a patient on the brink, a flutter here, a skipped beat there, all masked by a smooth, overlying rhythm. I isolated these anomalies, cross-referencing them with the lab's internal clock. Then I found it. They were small, incremental adjustments. First, a barely perceptible increase in the nitrogen levels, reducing the oxygen content just slightly below optimal. Then, a fractional drop in ambient pressure, followed by a minute spike in the main reaction chamber's thermal regulation. Individually, these wouldn't trigger an alarm. Cumulatively, they were a slow poison, priming the environment for disaster. The perpetrator had understood Thorne's protocols intimately, knew the precise tolerances of his bespoke equipment. This wasn't a random hack, it was surgical. But the timing and nature of the commands were the real tell. They mirrored the exact conditions Thorne would have been trying to achieve or troubleshoot during his most sensitive experiments. I moved to the equipment diagnostics. But the diagnostic data, when peeled back layer by layer, told a different story. The failures weren't spontaneous, they were induced. A remote command, timestamped seconds before the catastrophic event, had overridden a failsafe, deliberately directing an energy surge into the primary containment field. This wasn't a system malfunction, it was a digital assassination. I visualized the scene, replaying it in my mind's eye. Thorne, hunched over a console, perhaps noticing the subtle atmospheric shifts, the slight hum of a system working outside its parameters. He would have been troubleshooting, trying to stabilize his experiment. And then, the final, fatal trigger. The overridden failsafe, the energy surge, the containment field failing, releasing whatever volatile agent Thorne was working with directly into the already compromised atmosphere. It would have been instantaneous, overwhelming. A brilliant, meticulously planned death, designed to look like a tragic miscalculation. The method was horrifying in its precision. The attacker hadn't just killed Thorne, they had weaponized his own life's work against him. They knew the precise points of vulnerability in his research, the delicate balance of his experimental setup, the specific thresholds that, when pushed, would trigger a chain reaction mirroring a catastrophic research accident. It required not just access, but a deep, almost collaborative understanding of Thorne's unique scientific fingerprint. The tension in the room thickened, pressing down on me. I rubbed my temples, the strain of connecting these digital ghosts to a physical reality gnawing at my resolve. This wasn't just corporate espionage gone wrong, it was personal, precise, and utterly ruthless. The silence was profound, broken only by the low hum of refrigeration units and the distant drip of condensation. It was the last place anyone would think to look for me, or for the digital ghost of Thorne's final moments. I loaded the simulation, watching the digital representation of Thorne's lab environment respond to the manipulated parameters. The screen displayed a red alert, signaling fatal environmental breach. My breath hitched. The digital forensic trail wasn't just a smoking gun, it was a blueprint for murder, meticulously drawn. Someone hadn't just accessed Thorne's lab, they had re-engineered it into a death trap, remotely, with an expertise that could only come from intimate knowledge of Thorne's protocols and his bespoke systems. The puzzle pieces weren't just snapping into place, they were forming the face of a killer, hidden in plain sight, an expert among experts. My eyes burned, gritty and dry, but I couldn't pull away from the monitor. The log files, a digital chronicle of Aris Thorne's final days, scrolled endlessly. But the more I looked, the more they coalesced into a pattern, a deliberate, rhythmic stutter. Not a malfunction, but a signature. Someone had been meticulously editing, masking, weaving a false narrative into the lab's operational history. I zeroed in on the timestamps preceding the incident. They were too precise, too consistent to be random noise. The process was slow, each percentage point a crawl, but I felt the familiar thrum of anticipation. This wasn't just a cover-up, it was a layered deception, designed to withstand scrutiny. The killer hadn't just erased tracks, they'd laid false ones. When the decryption module finally chimed, a low, triumphant tone, I held my breath. A new directory appeared, marked simply archive_Thorne_ethics. It was encrypted, of course, a secondary lock on top of the already hidden data. The killer must have missed this layer, or perhaps they hadn't known it existed. Thorne, it seemed, had his own secrets, even from those close enough to orchestrate his demise. I worked methodically, the keyboard clicking softly in the quiet room. Minutes stretched into an hour. The algorithms chewed through the encryption, slowly revealing its contents. Thorne detailed his growing unease. He wrote about the unintended applications of his core bioengineering work, how his discoveries, meant for healing, could be twisted into something devastating. He mentioned a specific project, codenamed Chrysalis, which he feared was being weaponized. This project, Thorne wrote, was taking his foundational work and perverting it, aiming to create a highly targeted biological agent. He detailed his intent to expose Omnicorp, to leak everything he knew, to prevent the completion or public release of this dangerous offshoot. He even hinted at having secured a specific, unique biological marker, a critical piece of evidence, outside the main lab. My gaze drifted from the screen, landing on the cold coffee mug beside my keyboard. It wasn't about the theft of research, then. It was about prevention. The killer hadn't just wanted his work, they wanted to stop him from talking, from derailing Omnicorp's clandestine agenda. The sophistication of the murder, the elaborate digital cover-up, suddenly made terrifying sense. This wasn't a desperate act, it was a calculated strike by powerful players. They knew the value of Thorne's information, and the catastrophic implications of its public release. Thorne's final entries mentioned a secure location, a place where he stored early-stage samples, away from Omnicorp's prying eyes. He'd referred to it obliquely, as the old repository of life's blueprints, where beginnings are catalogued. A phrase that clicked with a memory from my initial background check on Thorne. He'd maintained an affiliation, an almost nostalgic connection, with his former academic institution. I packed a small kit, the digital evidence now burned onto a secure drive. My next move was clear. Thorne had been desperate, a man cornered, and desperate men often leave breadcrumbs in the most unlikely places. The old repository could only mean one thing. Tucked away in the older wing of the science campus, its brick exterior was crumbling in places, vines clawing their way up the mortar. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a sterile, blue-white glow on the rows of stainless steel drawers that lined the walls. Each drawer, I knew, contained the remains of someone who had donated their body to science. Thorne's logs hadn't given me a precise location, only a cryptic reference to a unique anatomical anomaly he'd been studying years ago, a specific genetic marker he'd found in an archived sample. He'd mentioned revisiting it, confirming its properties, believing it held the key to proving Omnicorp's sinister intent. I started at the far end of the facility, methodically checking the old archive logs, cross-referencing names and dates with the subtle hints Thorne had dropped. This wasn't just about finding evidence, it was about understanding Thorne's last desperate act of defiance. Then I saw it. A faint scuff mark on the polished concrete floor, too fresh to be old. It led to a bank of older, less frequently accessed drawers. My breath hitched. Someone else had been here. Recently. I knelt, examining the mark closer. A slight indention, not from a cart, but a boot, with a distinct, unfamiliar tread pattern. The killer wasn't just good at digital obfuscation, they were thorough. They might have been here to retrieve, or destroy, what Thorne had hidden. My eyes scanned the drawers. One stood out. The latch was ever so slightly ajar, a fraction of a millimeter, imperceptible unless you were looking for it. A deliberate act of carelessness, or a sign of haste? I pulled the handle. The heavy drawer slid out with a low groan, revealing its shrouded contents. And there, tucked beneath the pristine white sheet, in a small, sealed, biohazard bag, was a single, unlabeled vial. It shimmered with an almost ethereal blue luminescence. A biological marker. The key. But as I reached for it, a sudden gust of frigid air swept through the facility, not from the ventilation, but from the service entrance at the far end. My hand froze, hovering over the vial. I wasn't alone. The predator was still hunting, and it knew I was on its trail. Now, I was trying to map them to physical presence, to a specific individual. I opened a parallel window, pulling up the lab's access logs. Each entry, a timestamp, a keycard ID, a biometric scan. A digital footprint. I filtered by the critical period, the window of vulnerability I'd painstakingly established. The list was still too long, dozens of authorized personnel, contractors, maintenance crews, even the occasional university dignitary on a guided tour. Most of them could be immediately discounted. Their presence didn't align with the specific, intricate knowledge required to disable Thorne's security systems and then re-enable them with such precision. The sabotage wasn't brute force. It was surgical. It required an understanding of the intricate failsafes Thorne had embedded, the specific molecular pathways he was exploring, the precise calibration of the containment protocols. This wasn't a random act of destruction. It was a targeted assassination of both Thorne and his research. I started cross-referencing access logs against employee profiles. I focused on those with level 4 clearance or higher, individuals who could freely navigate the most restricted zones. Then, I overlaid their documented expertise. Did they possess the specific biochemical knowledge? The engineering acumen? The understanding of Thorne's proprietary algorithms? The list shrank from dozens to a handful. A lead researcher, a senior technician, a security consultant who had recently audited the system, and the Omnicorp liaison. Each of them had the technical capacity. Each of them had been present in the facility during the critical window. But capacity wasn't enough. I needed motive. An opportunity that stretched beyond a simple keycard swipe. I pulled up the profile of the Omnicorp liaison, David Thorne. No relation to Aris, the file stated, a detail I'd noted early on. His role was primarily administrative, facilitating communication and resource allocation between Omnicorp and Aris Thorne's independent research facility. On paper, he was a corporate functionary. But the digital breadcrumbs whispered a different story. I drilled down, past the sanitized corporate resume, past the university degrees. There was a gap, a curious 5-year period in his early career, listed vaguely as private sector consulting. That was the kind of euphemism that always made my investigative antennae twitch. I widened my search parameters, digging into public records, archived news articles, anything that might shed light on that opaque period. It took another hour, my eyes blurring, the fluorescent hum of the office a dull throb in my skull. Then, I found it. A buried article, an obscure industry blog from years ago, detailing a high-profile corporate espionage case. A biotech startup, groundbreaking research into genetic sequencing, intellectual property stolen, crippling the company before its major funding round. The article mentioned a consultant with a background in covert operations who had been tangentially involved, initially as a security analyst, later questioned regarding the internal breach. The name wasn't explicitly stated in the summary, but the timeline, the specialized skill set, and the subtle hints pointed to one individual. David Thorne. The pieces clicked into place with an alarming precision. Covert operations. Intellectual property theft. He wasn't just an administrative liaison, he was a wolf in corporate clothing. His presence in Aris Thorne's lab wasn't just to facilitate, it was to observe, to understand, to gain intimate knowledge. He had the technical skills, the access, and now, a documented history of involvement in precisely the kind of sophisticated, internal sabotage I was uncovering. He had been an inside man before. A cold certainty settled in my gut, sharper than any caffeine jolt. This wasn't just a suspect, this was the leading edge of a very dangerous blade. The stakes had just ratcheted up, from solving a murder to uncovering a deeper, more insidious agenda. Aris Thorne's research wasn't just valuable, it was world-changing. And David Thorne, the corporate liaison, was perfectly positioned to orchestrate its redirection, or its disappearance, for Omnicorp or someone else entirely. I leaned back, the plastic of my chair creaking under my weight. The office was silent, save for the hum of the servers and the distant city murmur. I needed to move, to verify, to prepare. This was no longer just about evidence, it was about anticipation. I knew what I had to do next, a long shot, a hunch based on an obscure cross-reference I'd made weeks ago, tucked away in my subconscious. I packed my minimal gear, my forensic kit, my encrypted tablet, a powerful flashlight. The thought of confronting someone with David Thorne's background, someone with experience in covert operations, prickled at the back of my neck. The drive was long, through the arterial veins of the city, out towards the quieter, older university precincts. This was where the forgotten things were kept, the silent teachers. I shouldered my bag, the weight of familiar comfort. The building's exterior was unassuming, a utilitarian structure of concrete and reinforced steel, designed for function, not aesthetics. The metal door, thick and insulated, hummed faintly. I swiped my access card, the magnetic lock clicking open with a low thud. Rows of stainless steel units gleamed under the sparse, harsh fluorescent lights. The air, thick with the scent of disinfectant and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet, clung to my clothes. It was a place designed for study, for understanding the mechanics of the human body, but tonight, for me, it was a place of quiet contemplation, a sanctuary of sorts where I could think without interruption, without surveillance. I had a specific unit in mind, one that contained a particular set of tissue samples Aris Thorne had discreetly sent here for long-term preservation, away from his main lab. A backup, he'd called it, for a project he'd been too paranoid to fully commit to digital records. A project I now suspected was the true target. The inside man had left a trail. Now, I just had to follow it to its bitter end. My breath plumed visible, a ghost in the sterile quiet. Rows of stainless steel gurneys, each draped in opaque white sheeting, stretched into the dim distance, silent sentinels to the ultimate stillness. This place, a repository of finality, felt like the perfect stage for a beginning. I adjusted the small, unobtrusive camera nestled amongst a stack of old anatomy textbooks on a high shelf, its lens pointed directly at the workbench I'd meticulously prepared. On the steel surface, under the harsh glare of a single overhead fluorescent tube, sat a sealed biohazard container. Inside, a single, unassuming vial glowed faintly with a fabricated bioluminescent marker. A breakthrough that, if real, would expose Omnicorp's clandestine bioweaponry development. I'd worked for days, stitching together fragments of Aris's true research, adding just enough fiction to make it irresistible. The idea was simple: bait the hook with the very thing the killer was desperate to bury. Only someone intimately familiar with Aris's work, and the true implications of his research, would understand the fabricated breakthrough's significance and feel compelled to act. My internal clock ticked, each second a small hammer strike against the silence. I'd let slip to a mutual acquaintance, a researcher who often crossed paths with Aris's brother, that I was making significant headway. Isolating a key variant of Aris's final project, something I'd brought here for secure, low-temperature analysis. The cadaver facility, with its limited access and constant. I knew Aris's brother had a lingering resentment, a constant undercurrent of envy towards Aris's brilliance. He also had enough connections within the university to gain access, especially if he thought he was doing a service, cleaning up his deceased brother's dangerous work. A faint click echoed from the far end of the facility, the sound of a heavy door latch disengaging. The hum of the cooling systems, usually a monotonous drone, now seemed to pulse with an almost predatory rhythm. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, crunched on the grit-dusted concrete floor. A figure emerged from the gloom, silhouetted against the sliver of light from the hallway. It was Aris's brother, his face a mask of strained composure, eyes darting nervously around the cavernous room. He moved with a practiced stealth, a man accustomed to operating in the periphery. He spotted the workbench, his gaze locking onto the glowing vial and the open laptop. A flicker of something, recognition, panic, resolve, crossed his features. He approached the bench, his movements quickening. His hand reached for the biohazard container, fumbling with the latch. He clearly intended to destroy the sample, to erase this supposed breakthrough. He froze, his hands still hovering over the container. He spun, eyes wide, a gasp catching in his throat. "Reed? What are you?" "I was just checking on things. Security's been lax." His voice was thin, reedy, utterly unconvincing. "Lax enough for you to wander in here at this hour?" I countered, slowly closing the distance between us. "Funny, I thought this facility was restricted access." "Unless you have a specific reason to be here, one tied to what's on that bench." His jaw tightened. "I heard rumors about Aris's work. Dangerous stuff. I just wanted to make sure it was properly secured. For the university's sake." He gestured vaguely at the vial. "That looks unstable. I was going to contain it." "Unstable?" I scoffed, stopping a few feet from him. "That's Aris's final breakthrough, a stable variant. A polymer designed to interact with a very specific protein structure. A structure I'd been finding trace amounts of, not just in Aris's lab, but in a few other unfortunate incidents." His eyes narrowed, a flicker of genuine fear replacing the faint concern. "What are you talking about?" I reached into my evidence kit, pulling out a clear, sealed bag. Inside, a microscopic fragment, almost invisible to the naked eye, lay on a black velvet square. "This is a specific polymer, a unique molecular signature. I found it at the site of the fire in the West Wing, the electrical fault that nearly took out the main server bank. I found it again, a smaller trace, near the ventilation system in the archives, right before the air quality incident that disrupted my access to Aris's early project files. I held up another bag, identical to the first, but this one contained a slightly larger, more pristine fragment. And this. This is from Aris's lab. Embedded in the singed remains of his workbench. The same polymer. A perfect match. His face drained of color, his gaze fixed on the bags. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. The feigned composure shattered, revealing a raw, desperate fear. To create. A catastrophic failure, a complete destruction of evidence. And you, Aris's brother, had access to it. You knew exactly what Aris was working on, knew the threat it posed to Omnicorp's bioweapon development. My voice dropped, a low, relentless hum. He was going to expose them, wasn't he? His breakthrough wasn't just about a neutralizing agent, it was proof of their unethical research. And you were tasked to stop him. He looked away, his shoulders slumping. Aris was reckless. Brilliant, but reckless. He found out about Project Chimera. The weaponized pathogen. He had a sample, a counteragent. He was going to leak everything. Omnicorp. They couldn't let that happen. They came to me. They wanted his research, the counteragent. And they wanted him gone. I was supposed to make it look like an accident. A lab explosion. Use the polymer to destroy the evidence, make it untraceable. I didn't mean to. I just wanted to protect him. To protect myself. His voice cracked. He fought back. He knew. He saw me. He tried to stop me from deploying the polymer. It went off. Everything went off. It wasn't supposed to be like this. The confession hung in the frigid air, a stark, brutal truth laid bare amongst the silent forms. The glowing vial on the workbench, the fabricated breakthrough, suddenly seemed to pulse with a grim irony. The trap had sprung. The frigid air of the lab seemed to solidify around David Thorne's confession, drawing the last vestiges of heat from the room. His shoulders slumped, the carefully constructed facade of grief and indignation crumbling like dried clay. The glowing vial, a beacon of fabricated hope just moments before, now merely highlighted the stark, brutal truth laid bare. My gaze flickered from him to the silent forms of the emergency response team, their faces grim under the glare of their headlamps. The trap had indeed sprung. Uniformed officers moved in, their movements precise, professional. David offered no resistance, his eyes vacant, fixed on some unseen point beyond the shattered glassware and the overturned equipment. I watched them lead him away, the clinking of handcuffs a sharp punctuation mark in the sudden, heavy silence. The immediate pressure eased, but a new, heavier weight settled in its place, the profound, chilling implications of what we had uncovered. The next few days blurred into a relentless barrage of interviews, reports, and security briefings. The lab, once a sterile sanctuary of innovation, became a forensic beehive, swarming with specialists documenting every microscopic detail. My initial findings, once met with polite skepticism, were now the cornerstone of a rapidly expanding investigation. That someone was his own brother. The media firestorm was immediate and brutal. Headlines screamed about fratricide, corporate espionage, and betrayal at the pinnacle of science. Omnicorp, once an unassailable titan of innovation, found itself under siege. The internal investigation I had pushed for quickly unearthed a tangled web of financial manipulation, suppressed research, and illicit data transfers, all aimed at seizing control of Aris's groundbreaking project. High-profile arrests followed swiftly. I saw the faces on screen, impassive and defiant, as they were led into custody. The ethical debate surrounding scientific advancement and corporate responsibility exploded, fueled by the stark reality of Aris's fate. Was the pursuit of knowledge inherently dangerous when intertwined with boundless greed? Weeks later, the dust hadn't settled, merely thickened into a pervasive fog. The air here was perpetually cool, carrying a faint, antiseptic tang that clung to my clothes. It wasn't the final resting place for Aris, but a secure, academic repository where some of his earlier, highly specialized anatomical models and unique biological samples had been transferred for safekeeping after the lab incident. A security detail, grim-faced and silent, ushered me through a series of reinforced doors. Inside, rows of stainless steel storage units gleamed under the stark fluorescent lights. It was an orderly, quiet place, a stark contrast to the chaos that had erupted around Aris's legacy. I was here to oversee the retrieval of a particular set of bioengineered tissue cultures, precursors to Aris's ultimate breakthrough, that an international oversight committee now deemed too valuable, too dangerous, to remain in the city. Everything accounted for, Reed, a colleague, a lean, sharp-eyed woman from the federal agency, asked, his breath misting slightly in the cold air. She held a clipboard, her pen poised. As far as the inventory goes, I replied, my voice echoing faintly in the vast space. Governments and international organizations, once dismissive or unaware, now vied for control, recognizing the immense power locked within those vials and data files. It was a race against time, not just to secure the remnants of his genius, but to define its purpose. Would it be a tool for unprecedented advancement, or a weapon in a new kind of global conflict? I looked around the silent facility, at the shrouded forms in their individual compartments, each a testament to the fragile complexity of life. Aris Thorne had pushed the boundaries, not just of science, but of human morality. And in doing so, he had paid the ultimate price. My part in uncovering the truth was done, but the wider implications, the ethical fallout, had only just begun to ripple across the world. The real fight, I knew, was far from over. The fluorescent lights hummed with a low, steady thrum, reflecting off the polished stainless steel surfaces. I wasn't here for Thorne's case, not directly. A new, unrelated incident had brought me to this sterile quiet, a forgotten detail from another investigation. But the silence here, the faint scent of preservatives, it always pulled me back. The Thorne case. It felt like a lifetime ago, yet the echoes of it still resonated, a persistent tremor beneath the surface of my professional life. The killer, apprehended finally, had been a meticulous individual, driven by a blend of ambition and fear, a pawn in a much larger game. The individual, a senior research assistant who had worked under Thorne for years, had believed they were securing a future, both for themselves and for what they saw as the greater good of their institution. They had confessed to the intricate sabotage, the staged accident, the precise manipulation of the lab's systems to erase their tracks. The individual I had brought to justice was merely the tip of a much larger, more dangerous iceberg. Thorne's groundbreaking research, once a beacon of potential, had become a currency, coveted by entities far beyond the reach of conventional law enforcement. I had seen the reports, the quiet diplomatic skirmishes, the frantic attempts by various international bodies to secure the remnants of his data. It was a stark reminder that some truths, once unearthed, refused to be contained. I remembered the look in the eyes of the apprehended research assistant during our final interrogation. Not remorse, not entirely. More like a haunted resignation, a bitter understanding that they had traded one form of servitude for another. They had spoken of pressure, of veiled threats, of a future where Thorne's discoveries would either save the world or destroy it, depending on who controlled them. And they had believed, in their twisted logic, that by taking Thorne out, they could control that narrative, steer the ship away from the storm. They had been wrong. The storm had simply changed course, gathering strength. The personal toll of that case still weighed on me. The long nights spent poring over microscopic evidence, the relentless pursuit of anomalies, the constant battle against the clock and against the formidable resources of those who wished the truth to remain buried. It wasn't just about a murder, it was about the very soul of scientific inquiry, twisted and perverted for gain. The line between progress and peril had blurred, becoming almost indistinguishable. There were moments, late at night, when the images of Thorne's lab, the scorched equipment, the silent testament to a life cut short, would flash behind my eyes. I would think about the potential of his work, the cures it might have offered, the understanding it could have brought. And then I would think about the hands it almost fell into, the destruction it could have wrought. It was a heavy burden, carrying that knowledge. But then I would remember the flicker of hope, the small victories. The meticulous reconstruction of events, the undeniable proof I had laid out, piece by painstaking piece. The justice, however incomplete, that had been delivered. It was why I did what I did. To be the one who looked closer, who refused to accept the easy answer, who sought the truth even when it was ugly and inconvenient. The Thorne case was closed. The official reports filed, the perpetrator incarcerated. The remnants of Thorne's research had been secured, placed under strict international oversight, its future uncertain but at least out of immediate danger. Or so they said. I knew better. The struggle for control, the silent war over intellectual property and world-altering discoveries, never truly ended. It simply evolved, shifting its battlegrounds, changing its players. I pulled my hand away from the cold metal locker. My phone vibrated in my pocket. A new case. A call from a detective, voice tight with urgency, about an unusual energy signature detected in an abandoned industrial complex out near the old docks. Another mystery, another set of anomalies waiting to be deciphered. The cycle continued. And so did I. The future, with all its promises and its perils, was always unfolding. And I would be there, sifting through the wreckage, looking for the truth.